Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, and finding out how people live. Milan is famous for style, couture, culture, art, and music, but its roots run quite deep. There's a lot to see and do here in the city, as well as plenty of excursion opportunities. Today we'll concentrate on some of the sites in the center, including the remnants of the city's time as a capital of the Roman Empire, the famous cathedral, the world's most famous shopping center, a medieval fortress, and La Scala, the opera house. So strap on your walking shoes and join me today on the Armchair Traveler. This is downtown Milan. It's quite walkable, providing your feet, knees, and hips are in reasonably good order, but it also boasts an excellent public transportation system. It does stretch out some from the Cathedral Square, shown here on my map and marked with the blue arrow. And one of the more famous sites that we'll visit today is the Sforza Castle, which I've marked with the black arrow. Other must-sees, including the famous lake and the Church of Santa Maria della Grazia, which is the home of Da Vinci's Last Supper, are further afield. Never fear, I'll take you to them in the next two video blogs. Let's start out with the ancient Roman underpinnings of the city. Milan became the capital of the Western Roman Empire in 286 Christian era, displacing Rome. I knew that the empire was split into Western and Eastern empires. Diocletian had been the man in command when it happened, and that the capital of empire was soon moved out of Rome, which was under attack. What I didn't know were the details, which happened like this. In 284 in the Christian era, the latest emperor was assassinated, and the former head of his imperial guard, a man named Diocletian, was proclaimed as his replacement. Diocletian was probably more of a strategic thinker and a politician than a field commander, but he was no fool. In the 50 years prior to his moving up to the throne, called the crisis of the 3rd century, there had been at least 27 emperors. No one really knows how many. We have a head count, but some of them only lasted a few days or weeks, and I suspect that there were others who lasted almost as long who didn't make the tally. In any event, Diocletian understood he couldn't run such a large empire from a single capital. He split the empire in 285 and appointed one of his generals, a man named Maximian, as co-emperor to run the western half. Maximian spent much of his time defending the empire north of the Alps and seems to have been mostly based in Trier. He couldn't run the empire very efficiently from there. He couldn't defend Rome while he was in the north either. Milan, under the name of Mediolanum, was just the ticket, and in 286 he moved the capital there. It lasted as capital until 402 of the Christian era, when the Romans decamped for Ravenna. Construction of the royal palace probably began immediately in 286. Running an empire required not just a military, but an army of scribes, administrators, executives, footmen, cooks, tailors, butchers, and far more. Space was needed to house these worthies. You can see that there's hardly anything left here at all, but the guess of its being the royal palace is a pretty good one. It was quite close to what scholars think might have been the Roman Imperial Forum, as well as to Maximian's enormous public baths. Sadly, there's hardly anything left to see. I suppose part of the reason is that the Roman bureaucracy only lasted for a little over a century, and there was no reverence for it. Once it pushed on to Ravenna, the local citizens either repurposed the Roman imperial building for later use, or, and this is what I think must have happened here, mined the walls and buildings for handy pre-cut building materials. There's a lot more to this story, more than I can cover here, but I'll post a separate short take on Diocletian and Maximian. This is the Basilica of San Lorenzo. The square facing the basilica features the so-called Column of San Lorenzo, or the Columns of St. Lawrence. These date from the 3rd century AD. They probably belonged originally to some large baths built here by the Emperor Maximian. He was the first co-emperor and responsible for building the imperial palace. They were brought to this location when the basilica construction was finished. This is Sforza Palace or Castle, shown here in an aerial view from Google Earth. To understand this castle or palace, you need to know a bit about the two Milanese families responsible for building it. The original Castello di Porta was built in 1358 by a Milanese nobleman named Galeazzo II Visconti. He had control of the city by overthrowing his uncle, Bernabo, probably faking a religious conversion and ambushing uncle during a religious procession. He locked up his uncle, who died suspiciously soon after, possibly poisoned on Galeazzo's orders. After several generations of infighting and scheming, the last duke from the Visconti family died, and fighting broke out. In 1450, there was fighting in the streets, and the city senate decided to entrust the son-in-law of the last Visconti duke, a man named Francesco, who had married the last duke's daughter, with the dukedom. Meet Francesco I Sforza, Duke of Milan, and his wife, Bianca Visconti, both painted by an unknown artist from Lombardy. Francesco wasn't born to the purple. He was a mercenary, one of the 7 illegitimate sons of a man named Muzio Sforza, himself a mercenary, and his mistress. Starting in 1419, Francesco fought alongside his mercenary father, soon gaining fame for being able to bend metal bars with his bare hands. He later proved himself to be an expert tactician and a very skilled field commander. Like all mercenary captains, however, his allegiance was to whoever paid him the most at the time. He had fought for the Papal States, but later on led the Milanese attack on those states. In this painting, you can see an oddity about Francesco. He insisted that he should be painted with the hat he was wearing as a condottiere, not something like a crown. Sforza's castle was actually Francesco's creation, but it was built on the remains of an earlier fortification, and before that, a Roman site. The Romans, and this will come as no surprise, scouted out this nice flat area first and built their own fortification, which they called the Castle of Jove's Gate. Galeazzo Visconti, we already met him, and his successors enlarged it until it became the square-shaped outline you can see here. That palace was destroyed in a short-lived war in 1447. In 1450, Francesco Sforza began new construction. It was renovated and enlarged several times, and for a while was one of the largest castles in Europe. In this aerial view, you can see the main tower, the tallest one at the back of the photo, which boasts a clock. It was called the Filaret Tower, not named after some battle or location or site, but after the architect. Like so much we're going to see today, this version is a reconstruction dating from 1905. This is a full view of the Filaret Gate, which I just showed you, although this time shown from outside the palace. This is the main entranceway, and it shows the Sforza family coat of arms. Notice the rather sturdy metal teeth inside the gateway. In Francesco's day, those sturdy metal teeth, called a portcullis, fortified the entrance and added a last line of defense. It's mounted in grooves on each side so it could be raised or lowered at will. Here you can see the tower from the large but unshaded inner courtyard of the palace. This picture of the exterior walls and a round tower, as well as the Filaret, actually confused me. The round tower and the turrety walls tells us that this was no mere pleasure palace. It was meant for defense. It was designed to allow the inhabitants to ward off invaders, if need be. I initially assumed that this was quite old, but actually it's not. The rusticated stone you see here was designed and understood to show the ancient nobility age of the rulers and the castle. This is a picture of the modern fountain, and just beyond that, the Filaret Tower. Opinions vary about that fountain. Some people think it sticks out like a sore thumb, but I rather liked it. This panoramic view, I have no camera that's capable of taking a photograph like this, is courtesy of Creative Commons and shows you the entire Piazza del Duomo, or Cathedral Square. The building in the center is the cathedral. To the left is the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, said to be the world's first modern shopping center and quite a sight. We'll visit it in a few minutes. The piazza is in the center of the city, both in a geographic sense and because of its importance from an artistic, cultural, and social point of view. Scholars believe this might have been the central forum area of Roman Mediolanum, although there are other claimants to that honor. Milan's layout, with streets either radiating from the Duomo or circling it, reveals that the Duomo occupies what was almost certainly the central part of the Roman city, perhaps that of a public basilica facing the Forum. The first cathedral, dedicated to St. Thecla, was completed by 355 in the Christian area. The old octagonal baptistry dates to 355, and you can actually visit it. It's underneath the current cathedral. When fire damaged the cathedral and basilica in 1075, the Milanese were ready to rebuild it as a Duomo. Construction on this gorgeous cathedral began at the end of the 14th century and was actually initiated by Gian Galeazzo Visconti, who we met earlier. The cathedral was not completed until late in the 20th century. The Milanese have a rather cynical saying that something that seems to be taking a long time will take even longer than it took to build the cathedral. As you saw in the earlier photograph, the facade of this cathedral is absolutely enormous, so it's difficult to focus in on the details. But once you do, your eyes light on the cathedral doors, shown here. They only look old. And the planning for them actually dates back to the 15th century, but they were finally completed sometime in the 20th century. Once you get past those doors and inside, you are confronted by the massive stone columns necessary to hold up the weight of this church, as well as the delicately designed but actually quite rugged ceiling, including groin vaulting. Among the treasures, tucked far above your head, is what looks like a completely out-of-place red light, high above the altar and almost at the very top of the cathedral. I remember when I first caught sight of it thinking it must be part of some kind of very sophisticated fire suppression system. And that wouldn't be the worst idea a cathedral architect ever had, but it is not. The light is there to mark the location of one of the cathedral's most precious treasures, a chunk of iron embedded in a gilt cross used to crucify Jesus. The story goes that the mother of Emperor Constantine the Great, an early convert to Christianity and revered as a saint, collected 3 nails, as well as the cross into which they were hammered, in the general area of Golgotha, and brought them back to her son to Rome. If you know more about this remarkable woman, her trials, her travels, and her life, check out my Maker of History video on St. Helena. I'll put the link to it in the information block below. Looking down from the ceiling shows you the inlaid marble flooring. Here you see symbols of the zodiac, including a scorpion and twinned fishes for Pisces, on either side of a brass strip. At first glance, these symbols seem pagan, even sacrilegious, leftovers perhaps from a much older belief system, and that observation is correct as far as it goes. Yet these symbols are here not to cast horoscopes or spells, so why did they survive into Christianity if it wasn't for fortune-telling? It was to tell time. I took the photo of the scorpion and the fish, not just because I was born in November, but because that brass inlay is what's called a meridian line. It serves science. This cathedral was never an observatory, although others have been, but observatories at the nearby Brera Astronomical Observatory built a meridian line here in the Duomo. The plan was to observe a beam of light crossing the brass line, which would tell them exactly when solar noon occurred. A signal was then used to set all the city clocks at the same time. The builders did a pretty good job, considering they did all the math with a quill pen. The line was examined in 1976 by the then current architects of the cathedral and astronomers as well. When they measured it out and cooked their data through a modern computer, they found that the line was off by no more than half an inch, and accuracy of the timeline is still within 2 seconds of solar noon. On the left, you see my photo of a kind of Milanese Lady Liberty. At least that's why I remember taking this picture. However, this is just one of 1,600 or so statues adorning this immense cathedral. It turns out, when I did the research, that I was correct. The statue is said to have inspired Frederick Auguste Bartholdi for the construction of the Statue of Liberty. Absent a pair of binoculars or a photo with a long lens, you probably wouldn't see it with your naked eye. There is literally too much else to gawk at. One side effect of cropping this photo to within an inch of its life is that you can see the multicolored marble from the facade. At a distance, it all looks white. You'll recall I told you it took a very long time to complete this building. Milanese are laughing about it to this day. And a lot of different architectural styles and aesthetics were baked into this cake. Reactions to it have ranged from admiration through amazement all the way to active distaste. There is, as my very beginning Latin teacher told me, no arguing about taste. On the right, you'll see what is said to be the most famous statue inside the cathedral, a rather horrifying portrayal of St. Bartholomew. If you've toured with me before, you already know that I was raised in the Protestant tradition, so I'm not generally studied up on my saints, although I did know he was one of the apostles of Jesus, mostly because one of my churches had kneeling pillows at the altar rail, and his name was embroidered into one of them, the one that was torn. Bartholomew's story goes that after the ascension of Jesus, he went on a missionary tour of what they called India, where he left behind a copy of the Gospel of Matthew. That's what you see in his hand in this statue. Unfortunately, no good deed goes unpunished. Someone disagreed with him or his theology, and Bartholomew was allegedly flayed alive and then beheaded on his mission. Today, because of that, he's the patron saint of tanners and artisans who work with animal skin. Depictions of him in this condition weren't meant to just horrify, or at least that isn't how they were used. They were used in training physicians as well. This sculpture from 1652 by Marco da Grate shows every muscle, vein, and tendon and depicts him wrapped up in his own skin as a kind of a toga. Moving on from the cathedral, we can turn our eyes to a bit of shopping. The Galleria Vittorio Emanuele is Italy's oldest active shopping gallery and a major landmark here in the city. This is a multi-level, multi-pronged shopping arcade, and it was named after Victor Emmanuel II, the first king of Italy. It was designed in 1861 and was built over about a 10-year period after that. The statue you see of Victor Emmanuel here in the square makes a great landmark in case you get lost in this immense piazza. The interior decorations of the Galleria are literally eye-popping. Here you can see some of the inlaid mosaics on the floor. There are actually 4 of them showing the city's coat of arms along with those of the cities of Turin, Florence, and Rome. When you gaze upward, you see the glorious glass dome. Just beyond the Duomo and connected to it by the Galleria, you come upon La Scala. This is probably the most famous opera house in the world, although Moscow's Bolshoi would probably give you an argument about it. Most of Italy's greatest operatic artists and many of the finest singers from around the world have appeared or are appearing here to this day. A previous theater here met the same destiny as so many others. Burnt to the ground in 1776 when America wasn't even quite yet a country. The new theater was built on the former location of a church called Santa Maria della Scala, which was decommissioned and from which the theater gets its name. This theater was renovated in 1907 and was given a current layout with nearly 2,000 seats. In 1943, Allied forces initiated a devastating bombing campaign on Milan that destroyed 14,000 buildings in a single week. La Scala took a direct hit, caving in the roof and shredding many of the interior parts. Remarkably, the neoclassical facade, which you see here, was saved. It was rebuilt and reopened in 1946 with a concert conducted by Arturo Toscanini. The then 78-year-old Arturo, returning from a self-imposed exile, agreed to conduct the inaugural concert. "The acoustic is as before, better than before," he commented. Toscanini's comments are important to music lovers. What makes this place so famous to historians is the number of important pieces that debuted here and the number of composers who wrote specifically for the house. Fame to people who go out? It might be the absolutely lavish decoration of the interior, which you can see here. But for music lovers like me, it's the acoustics. Sadly, I was unable to snag a ticket for a single performance while I was here, although I hope to do so one day. We've had a pretty good walk today, seen some sights, and learned a little bit of history. I think it's high time for us to have some refreshment, and an Aperol Spritz might be just the ticket. On the way back to the apartment from one of my walks, I saw some ladies sitting and quaffing an interesting-looking beverage, one that I had never seen before. I sat down at the table, and when the waiter asked me what I wanted, I pointed out politely and said, "Please." I'm pretty sure I felt a lot better afterwards. Thank you for joining me on this walk today to see some of the exteriors of gorgeous Milan. Come back next time for another adventure with me here on The Armchair Traveler.